Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for another episode on the building of my modular model railway. This video is sponsored by both D-Rails and Model Railway Scenes, two fantastic retailers who I'm really glad to have sponsoring the series, and I'll be talking about them a little bit later on. Now, previously I mentioned how I wanted to rebuild the corner modules at one end of the layout, and this is because the original two corner modules I built were quite big and bulky and they're really tricky to move around. Not only that, but because they were the first two modules I actually built for the layout, the track work wasn't as good as it could have been, shall we say. Now, as you know, my aim is to get this layout ready for an exhibition at the Spa Valley Railway, and if I'm going to put on a good show, I really need to have everything running smoothly. I don't want to be worrying about locos or rolling stock derailing, and so by rebuilding these modules, I think I can have a go at doing things better this time around. And this time, I've got plans to make them a bit more interesting too. So here is the first of the new curve modules, built to the same smaller design as both my tunnel and crossing modules. You can see the baseboard is already done with the end plates on either end, so I can jump straight in with laying track. I'm planning to have a short siding on this module, where the Heritage Railway stores out of use locos and rolling stock. So the first thing I have to do is set the position of the point, and more importantly, mark where the tie bar is so that I can install a motor at a later date. I'll then cover this area in spray adhesive, ready for a cork base to be laid down. And here you can see I've cut a second section out of the cork to match the curve of the point. Next, I'll fill the gap between the end of the point and the edge of the baseboard. And of course the excess here can just be trimmed away. And then it's time to continue my way around the curve. For this, I've cut the cork into two thin strips so that I can bend them to follow the curve of the line. And then I'll repeat this process for the siding, although this is going to be a bit straighter. The hole can then be drilled for the point motor, with the drill going through both the cork and the top surface of the baseboard. With that done, I'll now paint the cork grey. This will make ballasting around the point a lot easier later on, as the grey base will hide any gaps in the ballast. And obviously it's easier to do this now before I lay the track. As I had some grey paint left over, you can see I've done the rest of the track bed on this module too. I'll now nail down the point to fix this in position. I'm starting with the point since this has to line up exactly with the hole for the point motor. It'll then be easier to work my way outwards from here when it comes to laying the rest of the track. Those of you with eagle eyes may notice that I've got insulated joiners on the end of the point too. I'll probably explain why I've done this in a future video, as it's part of a much bigger project which hopefully I'll get round to next year. The holes for the feeder wires also need to be drilled as well so that power can be brought to the track. And gradually I work my way around the entire module, filling in the rest of the main line and the siding. Additionally, a couple more pilot holes are drilled at each end of the module for the brass screws to be inserted into. The rails are then soldered to the top of the brass screws, which will anchor them in position. Obviously the rails are a bit long at the moment, but these can now be trimmed back to the perfect length so that they're in line with the end of the module. A little bit of time has passed and you can see that I've weathered the track off camera. I didn't bother showing this process since it's pretty time consuming, and I've showed it plenty of times in previous videos too. Essentially though, this involves painting the sides of the rails in a grimy dark brown paint. The individual chairs have also been picked out in a rust colour too for some extra detail. The next step though is to ballast the point, which is a particularly delicate process. I'll start off by adding PVA glue between the sleepers and around the point. The key here is to not get any glue near the moving parts. This siding may only be used to store rusty locos and wagons, but I'd still like the option of being able to shunt this siding if I want to. With all the glue down, I'll now sprinkle loose ballast over the top. Any ballast that then falls into the glue will be held in place once the PVA dries. And of course the excess can just be hoovered up. The rest of the track can then be ballasted normally though, which involves adding the ballast first. As usual, I'm using the Woodland Scenics medium grey blend for the main line, which is what I've used on the rest of the layout, and there are links to that and everything else I'm using in the description should you want to try any of this stuff out for yourself. However, for the siding, I'm using a slightly darker shade that is made up from a few different ballasts that I've mixed together. The idea here being that since this is just a siding, it's not kept in as good condition as the main passenger line. I actually used this same ballast when I did the sidings on the yard module, so this way it's consistent across the entire layout. With all the ballast in place, a watered down glue solution is then added over the top of the ballast to lock it in position. There's also a drop of washing up liquid in this glue mix too, and that helps break down the surface tension so that the glue spreads through the ballast really nicely. Of course, watered down PVA does take a bit of time to dry, so I'll now leave this overnight and then we can start work on the Scenics in the morning. Our first sponsor today is D-Rails Model Shop, who I'm sure by now you know I'm a massive fan of. If you want the convenience of an online retailer but the personal touch of a local model shop, well, D-Rails should definitely be at the top of your list. They're not just a faceless company only interested in shifting boxes, they really do genuinely care, to the point that they test every single one of their locos before sending them out, so you know you're not going to have any problems. Regardless of what scale you model in, D-Rails have a great selection of locos and rolling stock to choose from. You can also pre-order all the new releases too, plus they have the essentials like track and scenery as well. Be sure to head over to drails.co.uk to see everything they have on offer, and thanks again to D-Rails for sponsoring this series. With the ballast dry, I can now start work on building up the landscape. To do this, I'll start by adding some formers that I've made using foam board. I'm intending to create a small access yard around the siding, so generally this module will be quite flat, but I still need to bring the landscape down from the height of the end plates at either end. On the left hand side of the module though, the slope can be more gradual, so for this I've used polystyrene and chicken wire. This is then covered with paper mache to create an initial shell. The paper mache is also added over the foam board formers too. And then once all the paper mache has dried, I go back over it with Mod Rock or plaster bandage to create a much more durable surface that will survive the module being moved around. Thankfully the Mod Rock doesn't take too long to dry, so the next step is to paint the entire module brown. This just acts as an absolute base layer of dirt or mud, which we can then add our proper Scenics to over the top. Next up, it's time for the return of my custom-made flexible dry stone walling, which I'm adding along the outer edge of the baseboard to define where the access yard ends. Also, I have to say a really big thank you to anyone who has ordered some of this. I've been really surprised at how popular it's been. It's actually crazy, and I can't wait to see it on your layouts in the future. And obviously, with this walling being made of foam, it's nice and easy to curve round corners to define where the yard is. I'll then add some PVA in a strip along the edge of the wall, and this is so that I can create a dirt verge. Finely sifted dirt from the garden is then sprinkled over the glue to create the verge. I also do the same alongside the track as well, and this will allow me to blend in the static grass that I use later on. And I'll use a similar technique to create the yard surface too, again starting off by covering the area in PVA glue. I then scatter some fine grey powder over the top. This is the Scenics Pothole Road Kit, which I've used all over the layout for various different surfaces. Unlike the dirt though, this needs to be a bit more durable, so I'm going to add my ballast glue solution over the top of this to seal it in place. When the first layer is dry, I'm then going to add a second layer of powder over the top just to fill in any gaps for a more even and consistent finish. I'm also mixing in a little bit of the sandy tan coloured powder that comes in the kit too. This will add in some nice variation and give me the dusty yard surface that I'm looking for. And to get the powder all nice and flat, you can see I'm scraping it down using an offcut of foam board to create a really nice compacted surface. The glue solution is then added over the top of this again, although this time I've made it a bit more patchy in the hope that it'll dry differently in each area.
Our other sponsor today is Model Railway Scenes, a great supplier of lots of little bits and pieces that add extra realism to your layout. By far, the standout is their own range of 3D printed details, which includes everything from platform benches to facades for modern day shops. And in a hobby where prices seem to be rising all the time, I find the Model Railway Scenes range actually really quite reasonable, and they've even gone one better by offering you guys a 25% discount on their 3D printed items. You can get that by using the code TMRG2023, you should be able to see that code along the bottom of the screen now. Use that on their website modelrailwayscenes.com, and who knows, with Christmas coming up, perhaps you'll find some fun little stocking fillers for things that you can add to your layout in the new year. Thanks again to Model Railway Scenes for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to use that code TMRG2023 for a 25% discount. With the glue now dry, we can see the final surface of the yard, and we've got that nice variation where the glue was a bit thicker. Before I get on with the rest of the Scenics, I'm just adding a little bit of scenic mud around the edges of the module in a few places. This is just for some extra texture in some small select areas, although to be honest I'm not sure how much this will actually show through when the grass goes down. Speaking of grass, it's time to add the base layer, and as always I start off by covering the area in PVA glue. The first layer of static grass is then added to the glue, and for this I use 2mm summer grass. This process is then repeated across the rest of the entire module. When the glue is dry, I then go back in with some layering spray to help the second layer stick to this. Longer 4mm static grass then gets added over the top, although I'm only doing this on the hills around the edges of the baseboard. The large flat section in the centre I'd like to be more of a farmer's field rather than just wild moorland. So here I'm going to go straight in with some shorter dead grass. I'll also add this dead grass around the siding too, using a mixture of PVA dots on the track and spray on the hill. This is to really hammer home that this isn't a public part of the railway. It's where the Preservation Society stores stuff to get it out of the way, and so it needs to feel a bit neglected with the track being overgrown. And of course, any excess can just be cleaned up afterwards. I had a little bit of a gap by the entrance to the access yard, so I've added a few of my laser cut posts here just to create a short section of fencing. Once all the wire has been threaded through the holes, I just add a little bit of PVA at each end of the fence to hold them in place. And the ends can then just be trimmed off. I'm also putting in some additional fencing alongside the track to create a boundary between the railway and the field. And I like using lots of different styles of fencing and walling, as it stops the module from looking too uniform or neat. This way it implies it wasn't all built at the same time by the same person, which is often the case in reality. The dry stone walling blends into the static grass really nicely, but to go even further here I'll add a bit of foliage to create a little bit of extra detail. Most of the time this section will actually be hidden at the back of the module when I'm operating from the inside, but of course for the exhibition the audience will be on the outside, so I need to pay just as much attention to this area too. And of course I'm adding the clump foliage elsewhere around the module too, just to create a little bit of variation. I now want to try out a new technique on the hills up to the end plate by first giving them a spray with some yacht varnish. I'll then drop some very fine scatter over the varnish to add some extra detail to the grass. The varnish will dry clear and the scatter provides a very new look to this area with some added extra texture. I really like how this looks. Especially in a slightly more overgrown area around the access yard, this carpet of undergrowth really does add another level of detail to this section of the layout. So I just want to take a quick moment to say a really big thank you to all of you who support the channel. Whether that's by simply watching the videos or by getting a t-shirt, it's all really very much appreciated. Of course, I have to give a special shout out to my channel members who really do help make the big layout videos like this one possible. As a bonus, of course, they get early access to all the new videos in the series. In fact, they're able to watch the next episode right now. And if you want to as well, just click that join button below this video. It only costs £1.99, so it's less than the price of a coffee, and we've got loads of great videos coming out over the next month, so this really is the best time to sign up. Like I said, just click that link below and hopefully I'll see you in the members area really soon. It's time to add the final details to this module to really bring it to life. The first thing I'm doing is adding some circular hay bales to the field, which really helps give this area a bit of purpose. And these are something I feel like you see out the window when travelling on heritage railways all the time. The yard also needs some clutter too, starting out with these 3D printed wire drums which I've dirtied up a bit. And I'm just going to have these stacked up in the corner by the buffers. I've also got this spare Hornby pug body which was left over from another video. As you can see, I've attacked this with the weathering powders, and again this is just going to sit in the yard as a future project for the Preservation Society. I also picked up a pack of spare buffers, and again these have all been painted brown just to give them a dirty, grimy look. I'll just stick them down using some PVA to create a little pile in front of the pug body. The railway needs a way to control the point into the siding too, and rather than run point rodding all the way back from the signal box, I've instead decided to add a small ground frame nearby. This is a bit of a temporary measure at the moment, as I think technically it should have 3 levers, but like I said, this one will do for the moment. The yard also needs a gate to control access in and out of it, so here's one I whipped up using the laser cutter. And this is one of the reasons I love having a laser cutter, is that I can create little details like this in no time at all. I've also got some industrial waste bins by the yard entrance too. Again, these just remind the viewer that even though it's a steam railway, it is a modern day scene. Also, I had a few random metal barriers left over from when I built the yard module earlier in the year, so I've just stacked these up by the wall. Now we get to my absolute favourite bit though, which is this loco tender that I'm going to put in the siding. This was actually part of a dapple plastic loco kit that my granddad was working on before he passed away. Rather than give it a perfect paint job, again I've given it a coat of dirt and rust, and I think it looks great here sitting in the siding, again as a future restoration project. It does have a moulded coal load inside the tender though, which isn't very realistic for a rusty tender on a heritage railway. So to get round this, I created a little tarpaulin to go over the top, which I think looks absolutely brilliant. And do let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a tutorial video on how this was achieved. In fact, I actually like the look of the tender so much that I've decided to do the same to the rest of the loco too. Again, the plastic kit has been heavily weathered by giving it a base coat of dark brown with some rust weathering powder to highlight some of the race detail. So that I don't fill up the entire siding though, I've got a cunning plan up my sleeve. I picked up this Oxford die-cast low loader which I'm going to place in the yard. The main loco body can then sit on the back of this, very much looking like a work in progress. Whether this particular restoration project is being delivered or taken away, well, I'll leave that up to you as the viewer. But honestly, this might be one of my favourite little scenes on the layout. Not only is it such a typical thing to see at a heritage railway, but it's so great to have a model that was built by my granddad getting a new lease of life on the layout after spending several years sat in a box. And so with that, we come to the end of this episode, and I'm so pleased with how this entire module has turned out. I was really keen not to just do another standard curve module, and this little access yard has not only added another point of interest to the layout, but it also helps sell the illusion that this is a working heritage railway. It's great to have this extra siding on the layout from an operational point of view too, since it now opens up some extra shunting possibilities for the future. And with this module now done, I just have 2 more to complete before the extended layout is exhibition ready. Like I said earlier, if you can't wait to see what happens next, click the join button below this video to become a channel member today, and you can watch the next episode right now. Believe me, it's a really exciting episode, and here's a little teaser of what's in store. I do some laser cutting, try out new techniques, and build some bridges.